Oh, hey there. So I've done a lot of video work throughout my life and throughout my career. And one particular place that I was freelancing quite a bit, they insisted that you wear a suit all the time, suit and tie. You couldn't walk in the building without it. If you were walking around, you just went to the bathroom or something, you didn't have your jacket on, then they'd be like, hey, you're out of here. And I went to the bathroom, and there was a guy in there that was wearing like work boots, but he wasn't working, and jeans. And I was like, oh man, they're gonna get you in trouble. And then I went in to do my show, and he was our keynote speaker. I'm like, okay, probably not gonna get in trouble because you're the keynote speaker. You win this round, sir. Let's see what you got to say. And then he told this story, okay? He had been a bartender, and around the turn of the century, the internet came around and Google came around. And so he thought he'd be clever, and he was like, hey, what's the biggest killer in the whole world? And the internet was like, water. And he goes, I think he must be broken. He's like checking underneath it, and he's like, no, but seriously, like, what's the biggest killer in the world? Like, what's the deadliest thing in the world? What kills more humans than anything else? And it's like, water. And he goes, this can't be right. So he starts looking into it, and sure enough, there are like 800 million people, it may be more than that don't have access to clean drinking water regularly. And so water kills more people than any other thing because people don't have access to it. And so they drink any kind of water they can. And I've been to Africa several times. I've seen where they just get like an old plastic jug or something like that and stick it in the river, or they'll just stick their face right down into a puddle and start drinking out of it or whatever. And so this guy's like, wow, that's the biggest killer in the world? So he starts talking to his friends about it, and he's like, man, did you know that water's the biggest killer in the world? Like, it was just baffling to him. And they're like, really? Well, we should do something about it. And he goes, yeah, I know, right? Well, then all these people started giving him money, and he raised like $20,000 or something. And he's like, I don't want to get in trouble for this. And so he goes to some charity and says, hey, look, I want to give you this money so you can go dig wells. And they're like, we don't dig wells. And he goes, well, here's some money, go dig wells. And they're like, well, you seem pretty passionate about it. Why don't you do it? And he goes, well, I'm not qualified. And they're like, neither are we. Tell you what, you can let us have the money, and we'll send you and give you the money right back so that you can go dig the wells. And he's like, ugh. And then he changed his life forever and decided, okay, I'm gonna go help save the most amount of lives I can by helping to eradicate the biggest killer in the world. And so he learns how to dig wells, and then they're like, all right, well, where do you want to go? He's like, ugh, I haven't thought this far ahead. And he's like, well, where's the worst place in the world to go? And they're like, well, you definitely don't want to go to Africa. And he goes, Africa it is. And they're like, I feel like you didn't hear us right. And they said, well, Africa's a big continent. Where do you want to go? And he goes, I don't know. Like, what's the worst place there? And they're like, Uganda. And he goes, all right, let's go to Uganda. And they're like, you probably shouldn't though. Like, it's war torn. There's warlords, all kinds of, like, you probably don't, that's bad news. And he goes, that's where I'm going. So then he gets there, and they're like, now where are you going to dig the well? And he goes, I don't know, like, show me what the map looks like. And they show him, and like, you can go to any of these places, these cities or whatever, but whatever you do, don't go to this triangle area here, because that's where all the bad people are. And he goes, that's the worst place? And they're like, yeah. And he goes, I'm gonna go there. And they're like, why don't you listen? And he goes, because I am completely unqualified. And so if I can go to the worst place of the worst place of the worst place, I can't really mess it up any worse. It's already the worst. And they're like, well, we feel like you're doing it wrong. So he goes and he digs a well, and he helps these people, and they're very grateful. And he's like, I'm gonna go dig another well. And then he goes and digs more and more wells. And the warlords don't like this, because there are a lot of people that their entire life revolves around, you walk several hours to go get water, dirty water, diseased water, and then bring it back to your camp. It's pretty much your day. And so if they have time to do other things, then they probably won't be as afraid of the guys with machine guns. Still afraid, but not as afraid. And so they didn't like this. And he started kind of getting a team of people together, and he met his wife, and then they had a family. And then these warlords were like, we don't like you doing this, so you need to stop. And he goes, oh, funny story, I'm not going to do that. And so then they stopped a bus that had some of his workers on there, and they shot him. And he was devastated. Him and his family were all devastated. And they're like, I'm okay risking my life, but I don't want to risk somebody else's life. And then they thought long and hard about it, and they're like, well, what else are we going to do? We're saving lives. And so I thought that was a beautiful thing. So he started an organization called Wine to Water because he had been a bartender, you remember from 5 minutes ago. And then that was wine and other alcoholic drinks. And then he went from wine to water. And of course, the analogy is that Jesus turned water into wine, and he's, playing off of that. But I thought it was a beautiful story, and the way that he told it was beautiful, and he was just willing to give his entire life to helping people with something he didn't even know was a problem. At that point, I realized, you know what, this is a bigger deal than I thought. And then we've got some missionaries at our church that go to Africa, quite a few missionaries that go to Africa. And one family in particular kept posting quite a few pictures and videos of them digging wells for local villages. And I was like, I want to be a part of that. And so then, I said, what can I do to help? And they told me, and so I was like, I want to help. And since then, I've been part of several other things. Now, when I went to Tanzania, first I went to Kenya, then I went to Tanzania, then I went to Egypt, which technically is Africa. And I'm about to go to Madagascar here in a couple months. When I went to Tanzania, one of the guys I went with had been a missionary to Tanzania for 4 years. And he visits there several times a year still, and it is beautiful what he does. And at the end of every trip, he says, what can we do for the village? And they always ask for something huge, like a well. And he's like, how about like something less huge, like a goat or a donkey or something like that, something that I can actually give you. And his daughter was like, Dad, they need a well. They keep asking for a well. And he goes, well, a well's expensive. And she goes, well, how much? And so they look it up. And it's about $3,000 or $4,000. And she's like, okay, well, I'm going to do that. She was 12 years old. So she does fundraisers and bake sales and car washes and whatever. And she raises $3,000 and then contacts the people that dig wells and says, hey, we want you to dig a well for the Hadza people in Tanzania. And they're like, well, funny story. So that's kind of an average, is the 3,000. Some of it, like you dig 3 feet down, like, you're in an island or whatever, or a tropical rainforest, you dig 3 feet down, there's a well. Sub-Saharan Africa, where you're talking about, that's like a $20,000 or $30,000 well. And she's like, And her dad, my friend, was just like, oh, you tried. She goes, no, we need to help these people. And her friends did fundraisers for 2 or 3 years, and they raised $25,000. And their own airfare to get over to watch the wells get dug and like do a celebration with the village. And these children raised enough money to give this entire village wells, to give them water so they don't have to walk or drink dirty, nasty water anymore. And I went and I visited that village. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that we take a lot of things for granted. We're like, do you have any idea how hard my day was? I'm like, was it first world problems? Like, yeah, this guy was going like 75 and a 70. I'm like, that is pretty slow. I feel bad for you. And my barista, I'm like, here it goes. My barista only put 2 pumps of soy latte, and I asked for 4 half pumps. I'm like, isn't that the same thing? And he's like, you don't understand my pain. I'm like, I don't. I see real pain, and when I see things like that, I'm just like, you don't. Nope. Although that is devastating, so is dying from not having water. Anyway, I just thought that was a cool story, and I wanted to share with you guys. So hope you have a wonderful night.